Hi, everyone. This is Sue Parks, the CEO of Orange County United Way. And we're so happy to have you join us in what is the start of an ongoing dialogue about what it really costs to live and thrive here in Orange County. This is such an important topic, especially now. Families were struggling before the pandemic, and obviously for our low-income workers, for our service workers, it's become even a more challenging time. So this is a start, public awareness, help all of us get on the same page, have the same baseline of information so we can move forward together to make this an even stronger Orange County when we emerge from the pandemic. So we are excited about this. Again, we anticipate we'll have 4 of these conversations to go forward. And just so you know, this is part of our ongoing key initiative, United for Financial Security. At Orange County United Way, we have 3 big focus areas, a key initiative around ending homelessness, United to End Homelessness. So how do we help our neighbors who really need our help in finding homes? So that's a big part of our work. Huge amount of work around students and student success, and not just academically, but how do we help this next generation of students graduate academically, but also physically, mentally, and technology ready to enter the next chapter and become part of the vibrant workforce here in Orange County. And this effort around financial security, that is so important. It's the base of everything we do. How do we help families go from just surviving to thriving? And to help set that baseline, we are so excited about the panel and our amazing speaker today. So without further ado, let me introduce Henry Gascon. Henry is the Director of Program and Policy Development at United Ways of California. And just to explain a little bit, we, as you might know, all United Ways are separate 501c3s. So you'll meet Alan's staff later on today. Alan, Market President, Bank of America, is on our board. We report to our local board. We are all about Orange County, but we are so fortunate to be part of a network of United Ways in California. And there's an organization that helps us with public policy and making sure that we're doing everything we can to be on the same page as we help more Californians. And Henry's part of that amazing organization and has led this research on the real cost measure. So Henry, thank you for joining us. I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the share screen option. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here. And you might hear some noise in the background. That's apparently one of my neighbors who has decided to randomly start drilling at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I hope you won't have any technical issues on your end with that. So I'm here to talk about the real cost measure, which is a pretty pioneering study in terms of what it really costs to make ends meet throughout California. And we've released 3 studies since 2015. And I'll do an overview in terms of what the real cost measure is and how it's calculated and how it's really distinct from the official poverty measure. I'll do some high-level overview, a high-level overview from the key studies, from the key findings from the study. I'll take a few minutes at the end to explore all the interactive resources that we built as part of the real cost measure. It's not just a study, but we've built a whole suite of online resources, including interactive budgets, interactive maps that you can actually go ahead and use to augment or to help better understand the findings from the study. And then I'll take a few minutes at the very end to talk about some suggestions for adoption, just in terms of what this actually means and what we can do on an individual level and at a collective level. And then we'll have a great conversation with a wonderful panel led by various Orange County communities. For those of you who love the Twitter and love social media, here's a couple of hashtags. You can use real cost for a hashtag, and you can tag us at United Ways of California or at Orange County United Way. So the real cost measure, first of all, is a far more accurate measure of who is struggling in California. Many of you are pretty maybe familiar with the official poverty measure, the FPL, and that was founded during the 1960s during Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. And if you're going to declare a war on poverty, you need some sort of an instrument to measure it by. So very famously, Molly Orshansky, an official within his Social Security Administration, looked at the cost of living for many household families back in the 1950s and 60s. And she determined that the cost of food was primarily one of the biggest cost points for families. So she basically calculated that the official poverty measure based upon the cost of 3 baskets of food. And for all intents and purposes, we are still using that formula today. It's just been adjusted for inflation. So it doesn't, the official poverty measure does not account for the cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and other basic needs. So the real cost measure that we developed does. So to kind of talk about the inefficiencies of the official poverty measure, there's a famous video clip from the TV series The West Wing where they talked about these inefficiencies, and I'm glad to show it to you right now.
On Monday, the OMB is putting out a new formula for calculating the poverty level.
I saw that. Does it need presidential approval before it goes to Congress?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
It's a good news, bad news thing. Under the new formula, poverty is up 2%. It was anyone under 17,524 before. Now it's 20,000.
What does that shake out to?
4 million new poor people.
4 million?
Yeah, obviously that's the bad news.
Yeah?
The good news is that more people will be eligible for benefits.
And taxpayers are nuts about that. Let's get back to the bad news. 4 million people became poor on the president's watch.
They didn't become poor. They were poor already. And now we're calling them poor.
What was wrong with the old formula?
I don't know.
Find out.
It's possible that this is a statistical reality and not a political fight.
Well, get with someone at OMB and find out what was wrong with the statistical reality of the old formula.
Yeah.
Do it today.
Yeah.
It's like when they did the thing with the SAT scores and I got dumber 20 years after I went to college.
It's a little like that.
Talk to somebody?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam.
Sam.
Yeah.
Bernice Collette.
Thanks.
Hey, Sam.
How you doing, Bernie?
Not wild about people calling me Bernie.
Sure. What should I call you?
Bernice is fine.
But how will you know I'm your buddy?
I'm okay living in the dark on that.
Okay. Can you tell me how the current standard was reached?
The new one?
The current one. The new one hasn't been signed off on.
We have to sign off on it.
Why?
It's much more accurate.
How was the old one reached? The current one?
In 1963, an Eastern European immigrant named Molly Orshansky, who was working over in Social Security, came up with it. Food was the most costly living expense where she came from.
Our cost of living formula for the last 40 years has been based on life in Poland during the Cold War.
This is what I'm talking about. I mean, food doesn't account for 1/3 of a family's budget. Housing is more expensive than food. The current model also doesn't take into account transportation and health insurance. So let's call the current model the old model and sign off on the new model.
All right. Sit down.
So I apologize if any of you may have experienced some sort of disconnect with a lag. It depends on your video connection, but hopefully you were able to get the gist from that video in terms of the inefficiencies of the official poverty measure. And one thing I want to note is that that particular episode was filmed over 20 years ago, and we still haven't changed the calculation for the official poverty measure. We're still using it today. In fact, we've been using the same measure for all intents and purposes since the 1960s. So the real cost measure incorporates the cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, and other basic needs to determine what it really costs to live in California. And the primary focus of this study is on working households, and that we found in our analysis that no matter where you live in California, at least 9 in 10 families who are below the real cost measure have one working adult. So these aren't families who are just looking to take advantage of the public benefit system that's available to them. They're working hard. They're working many hours. And as we all know from different family configurations, they work at different times of the day as well. The geographic focus of the study is based upon state, regional, county, and neighborhood level data. And to the best of our knowledge, aside from the official poverty measure, of course, these levels of geography are pretty distinct, and nobody else has the neighborhood level data that this particular study has. And for that neighborhood level data, we use public use microdata areas, and it's determined at the beginning of every decennial census. So we just had a census a few months ago, and the public use microdata area boundaries, the neighborhood clusters as they call them, those boundaries are determined at every census, and we should be getting the new boundaries for neighborhoods hopefully within the next 18 months or so. And another focus of the real cost measure is household budgets. So we looked at anywhere from 1 adult in a household up to 20 adults in a household. And we're able to determine through very pretty good estimates what it costs for any of those households, depending on household size, to live in California. So we have them for all 58 counties in California, and I'll show you a preview of that later today. So here's the list of all of the data sources that we've used to calculate the real cost measure. We use fair market rent rates by HUD. We use Department of Education data to look at the cost of childcare. We look at the Consumer Expenditure Survey to look at the cost of healthcare and transportation. And we also use federal, state, and local taxes. And one thing I really want to emphasize here is that these are all publicly available government sources in terms of how we calculated the real cost measure. So we didn't just make this up. We're actually using on statistically reliable data that's available to everyone, to every one of us, and we calculated what it really costs to live based upon these basic needs that are available to us. So this is the third release of the real cost measure. We most recently released one in 2019, and we're hoping to release another one this year. But we've now gotten really good at this in terms of adopting payroll taxes. We've now developed age-appropriate food budgets so we can determine how a toddler eats, for example, versus a teenager eats in a household, and make pretty good estimates in terms of food budgets that way. We're also able to calculate annual demographic data. So we use the American Community Survey, which is arguably one of the most statistically reliable surveys that we use here in the United States. They literally interview thousands of people every day to determine where they live, how old their children are, what their income level is, and we're able to incorporate that into the real cost measure. And then another new feature that we've introduced is an interactive real cost measure dashboard where you see all the interactive tools such as our household budgets, our interactive maps. We also have one-page county profiles. We've also developed legislative profiles. So for those of you who visit legislators, you can actually go ahead and print out what the real cost measure looks like in your particular neighborhood and have a discussion about the cost of living with your elected official. And we also have a public data set available, and we'll go over those resources too. So here's kind of just a very kind of big picture look in terms of what it would cost for a family of 4 in Orange County to make ends meet. So here we have a particular household configuration of 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-aged child. And you can actually see the income on the blue bars on the bottom. So we determine on average this family of 4 below the real cost measure earns just shy of $54,000 a year, and they get about $3,400 in the earned income tax credit, which is one of the most successful anti-poverty programs that we have here in the United States. So if we were to calculate, all the income that this family of 4 below the real cost measure earns, it's about $57,000. But notice the big red bar on top. We've calculated that it would take this family of 4, 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-aged child in Orange County to earn at least $98,000 to make ends meet. So what happens is we have a big gap. This family of 4 would actually needs to earn $42,000 more in income to meet those basic needs. So this is a big public policy question in terms of, how does this family do it and what do they do? And how that looks like really varies from family to family. Some simply borrow from family and friends, or even unfortunately a payday lender. And some may actually work with their landlord to, ask them to reduce the cost of rent for this month while they go ahead and catch up with food and car expenses and the like. So it's very difficult for these families to reach these gaps, and it's amazing how they continue to do it each and every day. So what does it cost to live in California? So let's compare Orange County with a couple of different areas throughout the entire state. So if we compare Orange County with Fresno, LA County, and Contra Costa County, so those are examples from Southern California, and the Central Valley, and the Bay Area, you can actually just see what the differences are. In Fresno, for example, this family of 4, based upon 2 adults, 1 preschooler, and 1 school-age child, would need just over $71,000 in income to make ends meet. In LA, about $92,000. In Orange County, you can actually just see how much the cost of housing is on average, a bit higher. It's about $3,000 more annually, so it's $98,000. But if this family of 4 lives in Contra Costa County, they would have to earn almost $104,000 annually to make ends meet. So really where you live in California makes a big difference in terms of housing affordability, childcare availability and affordability, food costs, transportation, and the like. So let's take a look at 3 different household sizes in Orange County. On the first column, we have 2 adults. In the second column, we have 2 adults, a preschooler and a school-age child, just like we just spoke about. And in the third column, we have 2 adults, a school-age child, and 1 teenager. And you can actually see how a household's expenses really change based upon having children in the household. So you can actually just see that the cost of childcare in the second bar really stands out. This family of 4, on average, if they were using a licensed childcare facility, would probably be spending about $19,000 annually in childcare alone, which is almost equivalent to the cost of housing at just north of $21,000. But notice how that once that preschooler and that school-age child grow up a little bit after a few years, they become a school-age child and a teenager. Notice how much those childcare costs decrease all the way down to $7,300. So we all know that kids are great, but we all know it's also very expensive in terms of their cognitive development and to cover their cost of childcare. So here's the primary finding from the real cost measure is that, the official poverty measure in Orange County probably ranges anywhere between 12 and 15%, depending on where you live, and sometimes a bit higher. But when you incorporate the cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation, all the basic needs that the official poverty measure ignores, we find that up to 37% of families throughout the state of California are struggling to meet basic needs. And one thing that I'll preface is that our study was released before the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's going to take us a couple of years to look at the impact of what 2020 and what 2021 is going to look like for many families who are struggling with food insecurity, with housing insecurity, those who have lost employment. So we're very carefully looking towards seeing those results. But even before the pandemic, we still see 37% of families who are struggling to meet basic needs. And when we quantify that in numbers, that's almost 3.9 million households. This is households, not individuals. So this is a pretty big story here. So this is what the state of California looks like with the real cost measure using public use microdata areas, which are determined at every single census. And there's 269 of these neighborhood clusters. So what the census does is they consolidate neighborhoods right next to each other to reach a sample size of at least 100,000 people to make it statistically reliable. And what's great about this is that it's far more statistically accurate than using zip codes or census tracts. To this day, I haven't met anybody who knows their census tract number or where their boundaries are for the census tract, but we all understand neighborhoods. We understand where Santa Ana is. We understand where Huntington Beach is, for example. And this is what this map really reflects in terms of neighborhoods. So here you see anywhere between 12% to 87% of families fall below the real cost measure throughout the entire state. Light yellow colors are good, dark brown colors are bad. So when you take a look at the 2 extremes in California, only 12% of families in the community of San Ramon and Danville in Contra Costa County are struggling to make ends meet, compared to 87% of families in the community of East Vernon, right in the heart of South LA. Almost 9 in 10 of those families are struggling to meet basic needs. So that paints a really interesting story in terms of how big California is, and more importantly, how big the disparity is among households, especially depending upon where you live. So here is Orange County, and here's all the neighborhoods that we have here in Orange County, according to the US Census Bureau. There's 18 of these neighborhood clusters, and we find that there's 34% of families in Orange County who are struggling to stay above water. And when we quantify that, that's almost 300,000 families. And you can actually just see the contrast between the light yellow areas and the dark brown areas in terms of the disparities within the county itself. So we have 62% of families who are struggling to meet basic needs in the eastern portion of Santa Ana, compared to about 14% in the community of Ladera Ranch and Rancho Santa Margarita. So this map by itself paints a really interesting picture in terms of where the degree of struggle is throughout the county. And it could be, and this alone could prove to be a really valuable tool in terms of where to invest our resources to really help struggling families in need. Another big finding, if we look at the demographic lens of the real cost measure, is through the four major ethnic groups in terms of white households, Latino households, Asian Americans, and African American households. So we find that almost about 57% of Latino households are struggling to meet basic needs throughout the entire state of California. And no other ethnic group really comes close to that. And when we quantify that, that's over 1.8 million Latino households throughout the state. And that, of course, put in the context of over that 3.1 million households who are struggling, it's well more than half. So here's what it looks like in Orange County if we look at the proportions of those who are struggling within each of these ethnic groups. So we saw it's 57% in Orange County also. So in white households, it's 22%. Asian Americans, it's 37% of households who are struggling to meet basic needs, and African American households, pretty much on par, interestingly, with Asian households. So we know about the large, significant Asian population that's existent throughout Orange County, and notice the degree of struggle that they're experiencing to make ends meet. So this is the proportion within each of these ethnic groups. But if we were to change this picture around and look at the numbers in whole, this is what it looks like. 126,000 Latino households are struggling, but look at the next highest group that is struggling. It's white households. So we all know that African American and Asian households usually fall behind in terms of economic opportunities, in terms of housing access, in terms of various socioeconomic indicators. But when we look at the actual numbers, we actually see an interesting story just based upon the demographics of Orange County, is that the second highest degree of people struggling are actually white households, which could certainly lead to really some interesting conversations on the local level. So one of the things that we look at too is the educational disparities within the real cost measure, and how education really impacts your ability to stay above water. So you can actually just see in Orange County, 72% of households led by a person without a high school diploma are struggling to meet basic needs, compared to about 18% with those who have at least a bachelor's degree. So one of the things that we're learning is that educational attainment certainly matters in terms of your ability to make ends meet. During the 1950s and 60s, when there were more employment securities through unions and other types of labor protections, you could pretty much get by and pretty much get your entire household by with all your basic needs. But now, through in 2022, with increased income disparities and decreased access to educational opportunities, we actually see this come to fruition quite a bit. So we see 37% of those with at least some college education are struggling, but your ability to go ahead and make ends meet is really reflective upon your educational attainment. Citizenship status is also a big indicator, and you can actually just see that 59% of non-citizens are falling below the real cost measure. And one of the things that we're learning about citizenship status is that the ability to speak English really goes a long way in your ability to make ends meet. So for many foreign language parents, for example, many of them rely on their children to be official ambassadors for their families to access social services in their local community, such as after-school programs or childcare programs. Those small children and often teenagers are often kind of the conduit for helping the family transition and get the access that they need into general society. So we can actually just see the disparities there between non-citizens and US-born citizens, whereas in the latter, about 25% of US-born citizens are struggling to make ends meet. Another big demographic group that we've studied with the real cost measure are single mothers. And we know about the enormous sacrifices that they make every single day in terms of not only being the breadwinner for their families, but also the emotional support system for their families. And we find that up to 74% of single moms in Orange County are struggling to meet basic needs, and that's almost 43,000 households. So single mothers, of course, are breadwinners, but they often work many different hours. They work different hours of the day. So they're not always there to feed their kids in the morning before they go to school. They're not always there to make sure that their homework is done after school hours, and to make sure that they get the nutrition that they need. And unfortunately, some single moms, due to their hours and pay rates, some of them work 2 to 3 different jobs as well. They might not actually be available to tuck their kids in at night. So often it's often up to other kids to take care of each other as well. Another vulnerable demographic group are children, are households with children under the age of 6, so that 0 to 5 age group. And we're so grateful to organizations like First 5, who actually really pay attention to the needs of young children and their cognitive development. But we find that up to 54% of households with children under the age of 6 are struggling in Orange County, and that's about 72,000 households. And one of the biggest barriers for them, obviously, is the cost of childcare and all the expenses that children need in terms of educational items and so forth. And one thing I want to add too is that the real cost measure, and we just talked about those basic needs in terms of housing, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. Those are just the basic needs, but notice the things that it doesn't account for, like utilities or broadband service or school supplies for the children. Those are pretty much under miscellaneous expenses. But we all know that those miscellaneous expenses really add up. So we're looking forward to kind of strengthening the utilities component of the real cost measure in due time. We've had some great conversations with the California Public Utilities Commission, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of reflect those utility numbers in the years ahead. Another vulnerable demographic group are seniors, and we've partnered with the UCLA and the Fielding School of Public Health, and they've developed a wonderful product called the Elder Index, where they look at the financial stability of seniors throughout the state. And they found that at least 25% of seniors are struggling to meet basic needs throughout Orange County. When we first released the real cost measure, it was kind of just slowly in the aftermath of the Great Recession that we experienced back in 2008, 2010. And our first study came out in 2015. And we found out that in the immediate aftermath of the recession, many seniors were competing with teenagers and other younger people, because they re-entered the labor market because they couldn't meet basic needs. And one of the primary basic needs for many of these seniors are basically the prescription drugs. And usually, if they're asked to skip out on the basic needs in order to make ends meet, one of the first things that they would skip out on are their prescription goods. Another big component to the real cost measure is housing. And we all know how expensive housing is throughout California and throughout Orange County, and we find that up to at least nearly 4 in 10 households in California pay at least 30% of their income on housing. That's quite a bit, and these numbers are really higher than what the real cost measure reflects. And we find that over 4.2 million households throughout the entire state are spending at least 30% of their income on housing. And historically, we've looked at, we've always been told that we shouldn't be spending more than 30% of our income on housing. But in California, I think that number is getting closer to 40%, just based upon the rising cost of housing that we see throughout the state. And this isn't exclusive to Orange County or to the entire state. We're actually seeing this throughout the Central Valley, parts of Northern California, and other rural communities as well. So here's what the housing burden map looks like throughout California. The dark red colors indicate more housing burden. So we see 22% of households in the community of Sunnyvale and North San Jose spend at least 30% of their income on housing, compared to about 62% once again in that community of East Vernon in the heart of South Los Angeles. If we take a look at Orange County, here's the map, and you can actually just see the array of colors in terms of housing costs and housing affordability throughout the county. So we see here at least 40%, right on the dot, of families are spending at least 30% of their income on housing in Orange County. That's almost about 370,000 households. If we take a look at the two disparities between in the counties, we see at least 50% of families in the portion of Western Anaheim are spending at least 30% of their income on housing, compared to about 29% of families, once again, in that community of Rancho Santa Margarita, Ladera Ranch. So now that we've taken a look at the expenses, we'll take a look very briefly at the income disparities throughout the entire state. And you can actually just see the state median income for households, according to the real cost measure, is about $81,000. The two extremes are for a household in San Ramon, Danville, and Contra Costa County, the median income there is about $193,000 compared to the community of USC and Exposition Park in South LA, where the income there is $37,000. And take that USC number and Exposition Park with a little bit of a grain of salt because there's such a high number of students, of course, at USC, but it also speaks to the fact that there's at least 100,000 people living there, which makes it statistically reliable. So here's the income disparities within Orange County. In Orange County, the median household earnings there is about $94,000, which is about $14,000 higher than the state average. But look at the two disparities here between the western portion of Anaheim, where the median income there is just shy of $65,000, compared to about $160,000 in income in the community of Rancho Santa Margarita and Ladera Ranch. So putting this in a big macro context, looking at median household earnings and gross domestic product, and since 1997, gross domestic product, of course, is the value of goods and services that have been produced. And here's the big finding, which kind of just puts us really into context, is that since 1997, California's GDP has grown 161%, while median household earnings has only increased to 15%. So this really speaks to the fact that the cost of housing, childcare, transportation, and other basic needs continues to increase, including the value of our labor. But notice how flat median household earnings have been throughout California pretty much since 1997. I would say if we were to go back actually to the late 1970s or early 1990s, I don't think that red bar of median household earnings would be a lot different. What this tells us is that the middle class hasn't gotten a raise in over 4 decades, but the price of goods and services continues to increase. This, of course, leads to numerous public policy questions as well. And Pete Manzo, who I think is on the call as our president and CEO, he kindly shared with me this great chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this was analysis that was shared to us, to our United Way system a few years ago at a conference. And you can actually just see the disparities between hourly compensation and productivity pretty much since after World War II. And you can actually just see how nationally our productivity has been off the charts. We've been among the most productive societies in the world, 250% productivity pretty much since 1948. But notice how our hourly compensation has pretty much flattened out, pretty much right at the line between the late 1970s and early 1980s. So with that, I want to go ahead and just spend a couple of minutes just going over our interactive resources before I turn it over to Alan and the panel. If you give me one quick second, I'm going to go ahead and just share switch my screen here. And these are all the interactive resources that we built as part of the real cost measure. So we have household budgets, an interactive dashboard, we have interactive maps, we have our county profiles, our legislative profiles. We even have a public data set where we actually have our data in Microsoft Excel. So for those of you who are really into data and want to look at the numbers and all the way down to the neighborhood level, you can do that. And we also have we've also been fortunate to get some great media coverage with the real cost measure. So let's take a look real quick at our household budgets. And this is a great interactive tool that you can also use on your mobile phone as well. So I'm going to go ahead and select our county of Orange County here. And there's Orange County. And these are all in alphabetical order, which makes it great. And you can add age numbers for everybody in the household, and it will tell you at least what the minimum is for this family to make ends meet. So let's add in a couple of adults. Let's add a couple of 33-year-olds. Let's add a senior at the age of 70. Let's add a school-age child at the age of 8. And let's add a teenager at the age of 15. So this family of 5 with 2 adults, 1 senior, a school-age child, and a teenager would need at least over $103,000 in income to make ends meet in Orange County. And monthly, that's over $8,600. So this is a pretty good interactive tool in terms of a baseline that will reflect financial stability in your local county. This is an interactive real cost dashboard. So you can actually take a look at the real cost measure from 2014 to 2017, and we're hoping to release 2018 and 2019 data this year. The numbers don't change that much statistically from year to year, but it's still important to show these findings. So just to show the interactive maps, for example, I could just hover over any area in California, and you can actually just use the search box. You can type in Orange County, and it will tell you, it will identify the neighborhood cluster for you, and it will tell you what the percentage and the number is below the real cost measure. We also have one-page county profiles. So if I click on the drop-down menu, if I select Orange County, you can actually go ahead and print this out, and it will just give you like a high-level picture in terms of who is struggling throughout the entire county. And then we also have the legislative profiles as well. So you can actually, if you ever have a meeting with a congressional member, with a Senate, with the Senate Assembly member, or with an Assembly district member or state senator, you can actually go ahead and choose any of the one-page legislative profiles, and it will show you the neighborhood boundaries of who falls below the real cost measure within their respective political district. So let me come back to our slide deck here. Before I turn it over to the panel, I just want to share very briefly in terms of how the real cost measure can be used. One of my favorite tools, of course, is a financial literacy tool. So, you know, for those of you who have children and they're playing sports at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, let's say you have a kid who comes out of football practice, is home alone, opens up the refrigerator and is really hungry, and pretty much empties out the refrigerator. And then 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening comes along, everybody gets home, and they open the refrigerator and they realize it's all empty. This could be a really good, gentle intervention opportunity to educate your children in terms of the cost of living and all the sacrifices that parents make every single day in terms of housing, in terms of transportation, in terms of food, to make ends meet. And it would also give them a head start to helping them become financially responsible. It could be a tool to, it can also be used as a tool to advocate for changes to help families move up. We have a whole series of advocacy recommendations in the study, but we're also going to leave it to the panel to discuss some of that as well. And it's a great tool, grant writing tool for nonprofits and foundations to look at grant opportunities in terms of making sure that the resources that are available in a community go specifically to those in need. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and do a stop share, and I'll be happy to answer any technical questions as well. Let's see, do we have any technical questions from the attendees? Okay, and it says, what % of households are considered non-citizens, naturalized, and US born? I think we have that data. I think we found that up to 59% of non-citizen households in Orange County are struggling to make ends meet, and US born is about 25%. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alan's staff at Bank of America, and he's going to lead our panel into a conversation in terms of what opportunities and challenges that we have in light of this study. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. What a great presentation. I was actually taking some notes. So I think it's amazing, and it's great education for everybody in our meeting today, that the real cost measure gives us a chance to get a more accurate view of really what it takes to live in California, but also here in Orange County. I was struck by all the data sources, very reliable, great way to validate all the work that you did. And then, as I was reflecting on all of the different component parts, you think of what it takes to live, and you're like, well, why wouldn't we have always had a better measure? And this is far more comprehensive and useful. That some of the stats, the $98,000, a big number, 37% still struggling to meet the basic needs. I really think that the slides, the tools, the links, and the graphics are really great. I really like that you could show the locations, the demographics, and the educational disparities that you have all throughout the state, and especially here in Orange County. And really, it kind of sets up the whole discussion about we've got these gaps, and we've had this imperative to go ahead and address them. We got to get there. And it's really important. I mean, I live here, I grew up here. We have I work here, so I've got a lot of teammates, thousands of us that work in Orange County. So let's work on getting this addressed. But today it's a lot about education, sort of level setting for everybody, let everybody understand what the data is to support why we need to work on it. So I'm really glad about the public awareness part of this. And frankly, we got to work on all of this because it's going to give us a better future here in Orange County. So let's pivot and have a conversation. It's a chance for me to lead a great panel. We've got great people here to talk about the issues today. We'll pivot off of Henry's discussion. So let me introduce our panel. With us today, we have Debra Baetz. Debra is the director of Orange County Social Services Agency. And then we have Fram Virjee. He's a president of Cal State Fullerton. Hi, Fram. And then we've got Brenyal Toomer-Byas, who is the executive director of Orange County United Way. So to kick us off, Debra, what struck you most about the findings and the real cost measure?
Well, I think for me, looking at it through the safety net programs that social services administers here in Orange County, I think was the information that Henry shared about the federal poverty levels and how they're calculated, and then the true amount of income that it takes for a family to meet those very, very basic needs. And it's interesting because our safety net programs are all based on eligibility factors that are driven by those FPL levels. And so our CalWorks TANF program, that income threshold is about 130% of the federal poverty level, while CalFresh in California is about 200%. And I want to translate that into numbers. So if I look at just CalFresh alone, that 200% of the federal poverty level is about a little over $52,000 of annual income. And so when Henry shares information about $57,000 being the average income in Orange County, it's startling to realize the gap that exists and the misalignment that federal poverty level has and how we determine eligibility. And so already there's a large percentage of the population that is just over the income threshold, but still struggles to meet their very basic needs. And that was startling for me today. And then when I looked at the number of the estimate of the food costs for that family of four, I just want to take a moment to pause. Henry's data and the presentation reflected that the annual food for that family of four, just food alone, was just over $12,000. It was $12,264, I believe, in the chart. So even if you become eligible CalFresh, the maximum grant amount for that family of four, and many do not receive the maximum amount, but it's approximately $680 a month, which is approximately $8,100 a year. So even with the support that our families receive, it's still insufficient to cover the full cost of food in that particular resource in Orange County. And so for me, it was really sort of highlighted for me areas of focus and areas of advocacy in regards to the FPL levels at the federal level. And it was very startling to see the gap that exists between the safety net programs and the real cost of meeting those very basic needs.
Thanks, Debra. You really bring up a great point, this idea of advocacy, right? So we've got the data, Henry's got these terrific, reliable sources backing up all the numbers. And then frankly, that's why we're all here today, is to help advocate. So we've got the data and we all own this issue, right? It's not the public sector, it's not their issue, it's the private sector, it's all of us. So I like that. So I'm going to keep using that word of the advocacy all throughout today's presentation. Fram, let me ask you a couple of things. So you think about the data. Debra just talked about some of it, and Henry as well. How does that impact the work that you do and the students that you serve?
Well, this is actually not a new issue to higher education. This is something that we have been looking at for the last several years. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago that the CSU did a study of food insecurity for the first time of our students across California. And we found that 1 in 10 of our students are housing insecure. That means they don't know if they can pay their rent, they're couch surfing, they're living in unhealthy conditions, they're living in their car. And about 1 in 3 of our students are food insecure. That means they're not eating well or healthy. They're not sure where their next meal is going to come from. You know, the idea of the starving college student, it's a real idea. So we have students who have to make decisions on whether to pay tuition or buy books, or pay rent and buy groceries. So there's a quiet crisis going on within our communities, within our own student communities. We have a Tuffy's Basic Needs Center on campus that serves more than 2,000 visitors annually with food assistance, temporary emergency housing, financial support, the distribution of clothes and hygiene products for students. This is real cost measure is very similar to something we deal with. The financial aid system that we have in California for and in the United States for college students is not built on providing the educational equivalent of the real cost measure, what I would call the total cost of attendance. That's what we call it in higher ed. The good news is we provide tuition remission or waivers or grants at Cal State Fullerton and in the CSU system for about 2/3 of our students. So about 2/3 of our students, which is an amazing statistic, pay no tuition after grants and waivers. That's an amazing statistic for a nationally ranked four-year university. About half our students graduate with no debt. And for the other half that graduate, it's about $15,000. But here's the bad news. The financial aid covers tuition and books, but not food, rent, health insurance, transportation, childcare, etc. So most of our students are working many full-time, some with a couple of full-time jobs in order to go to school. Nearly 50% of our students at Cal State Fullerton are Pell eligible students. That means that they come from a family with an average annual income of below $50,000. So if you look at the real cost measure, that puts them at a level almost $50,000 below the real cost measure for Orange County. Even as you see with 3 minimum wage full-time jobs, they don't make that. And they're going to school. What does that mean? It means that most of those students, and they come from families who are far below the real cost measure and really can't afford to attend university. Not because the school is too expensive, but because we provide the waivers, but because the total cost of attendance, or here the real cost measure, is the guardrail against going to school. Now, we also know that this disproportionately affects our students of color from our Black, Latino, and Asian communities, which is, again, verified in the real cost measure data that we just saw. And that's who Cal State Fullerton serves, 50% Latinx, 25% API. You know, we're number 1 in California for graduating women and Latinx students, and number 2 in the nation for graduating students of color. 60% of our kids are first-generation students. But what we know is this works. Going to college is the answer to part of this problem that we're looking at. We're ranked 3rd in the nation at Cal State Fullerton for social mobility. Just to be included in that ranking, we had to have 50% Pell students and who graduate within 6 years. We have 300,000 graduates in Orange County, 12,000 graduates a year. The salary data tells us that when they graduate, they make more than $51,000 a year, and mid-career they make $100,000 a year. So our Pell students, that means that from the moment they graduate, they earn more than their entire family put together. It also means that together, 2 married mid-career Titan grads will own $200,000, which is double the real cost measure. So we know education is the answer. We also know it's good for Orange County. 80% of our students stay in Orange County. They live within 50 miles of our campus. So we know this is a real problem in our community. And we also know it's a real problem within our college campus, but we know that there are solutions to help get there.
Yeah. Thanks, Fram. And just for the audience, Fram, I mean, these statistics are amazing. And I love the term. We do have this quiet crisis, and really connecting the dots on the real cost measure, because there's a real cost measure to education as well.
Right.
Right. So, but for the benefit of the audience, big, important university, not only in California, but of course here in Orange County. And I know a lot of my teammates are graduates from Cal State Fullerton. And but you have a big university. How many students today, undergrad and grad?
So we have 41,500 students at Cal State Fullerton. Let me put that in perspective. We are the third largest university in California if you include graduate programs. But for undergraduate, we're the largest university in California and one of the largest in the nation. And still, we had 83,000 applications last year for 8,500 spots. So we really have a need to expand access for these students so that they can enjoy that social mobility.
Yep. Well, thanks, Fram. I mean, that's you're building our future. You're part of that effort, and we all need to help. And so that's what, again, today we'll get that sort of flywheel going, right? We got to help. We got to help. Let's pivot over to Brenyal. Okay, so Brenyal, magic wand, right? You get a couple of things, 2 to 3 things to improve the well-being of our community. What would those be?
So I think, love this question, by the way. For me, this would really be about creating an even greater sense of ownership in the community-wide, that's really felt at the individual level. So that when one person is struggling in our community, it is something that we all feel compelled to do something about to fix. So with my magic wand, I really think it begins at an individual level and swells from there. And I really, with the magic wand, would want to see the community start to debunk myths and dispel notions, like something we've always heard our whole lives about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. When the reality is some people don't have boots to pull up the bootstraps for, and don't have access to boots. And so we really have a lot of work to kind of do to dispel myths and dispel notions that suggest those things. And for me, I think with the magic wand, most importantly, I want to see this data help to build a concrete action plan and response. Something that's very time bound with action items about how the public and private sector can work better together, what populations to prioritize serving and how to go about that. And I think a really robust public awareness strategy and policy agenda would be something I would like to see with my magic wand and wish.
Okay, I know we're all in for that, right? We're all in. So I do believe, I think Debra brought this up earlier, this advocacy. I think it connects to your concept of, sense of ownership, and we do. So at some point, like not today's the awareness part, but we will get to the point of putting things into action and pick a few things, get them done. But this is a forever opportunity for us. This is not just something we do in 21 or 22 or whatever. It's the imperatives there. Henry gave us all the data, and then we've got to work on steps to make it better. So Fran, let's go back to you. What challenges do you think maybe hamper our ability to address some of these opportunities?
Well, Ellen, it's exactly what you were just talking about. We have to take the long view of this because that's the only way we will solve the problem. Band-aids will not work. And I'm coming at this from an educational perspective. So, the first thing I'm going to say, which is what we always say, which is funding, right? For the CSU, which is the system that is most geared toward the students that we are talking about in this demographic, we don't have a assured funding system. The UC has independent funding plus medical centers and research. The community college system has Prop 98 and Prop 60. CSU has to go begging each year for funding. Also, each year, when there's a crisis, we're the first to be cut. So we just had our budget cut $200 million for the CSU, which is a $25 million cut for me. And we have over $50 million in losses and expenditures from COVID. But it is not just a funding issue. I'm going to focus on Orange County for a minute. If you want to talk about advocacy, let me say something that won't sound startling when I say it, but it is startling when you think about it. We are the only CSU in Orange County. There are 5 CSUs in LA, 5 in the Bay Area, 3 in the Fertile Valley of California, and just 1 in Orange County, a place where we are the 6th largest, most populous county in the U.S. and the 3rd largest economy in California. As I said, we have 80,000 applications a year for 8,500 spots. There's so many students that we need to serve. We are also the lowest funded CSU per student in the entire system. So not only is the CSU underfunded, CSU Fullerton, it receives the least fund per student of any CSU. So we need to advocate to change that. Okay, now I'm going to get off my soapbox on finances because I know that cannot be the answer to everything, but I will say something else, and that is change the view of the public with respect to higher education. Higher education is still underlined an investment, not only for students, but for the community that the students live in. We produce 50% of the teachers in Orange County, 50% of the nurses in Orange County, 50% of the accountants and engineers in Orange County, lots of the doctors and entrepreneurs and lawyers. Alan, as you said, I talk to people in all over Orange County. They say, hey, half my staff are Titans, which I love, right? But that means that we are the future of social economic mobility. For every dollar that the state gives us, we produce $13 in the economy in real time today. We're a huge contributor to the economy with employees and students, but we're also the key to future upward mobility of these families. When these students graduate and they get these jobs that actually pay, they lift their entire family. Most of our students come from families who don't meet this real cost measure, but most of our alumni meet the real cost measure. That's the transformation. So that's what I think we can do.
That's great, Fram. First of all, thanks for your energy, okay? Keep that energy going. Okay, give that guy more caffeine, some sugar. That's awesome. And if we just got to copy and paste your energy across the county and we're going to get this done. Way to go. And I absolutely believe, and I know I know the private sector's all behind this because you brought up some really great points about the future for upward mobility and social economic mobility. It is transformative. So it is a key pillar in everything that we do here in the county. Brenyal, so we're gonna have one more question sort of from the formal part of the panel, and then we'll start to work on some of the questions that we received from the audience. But Brenyal, so give us some positive things, like what's happening. We've identified some of the challenges. We got that. So maybe give us some hope here. What are some of the positive things happening in our community?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about the work, obviously, we're doing at United Way through our key initiatives, engaging various stakeholders, companies, working alongside other funders and nonprofits to close the gaps in addressing homelessness and financial security and helping students achieve success. We've seen in this past year a greater sense of community and togetherness, a real true sense of urgency, as we've seen in response to the pandemic. We've seen really a push and an adoption of having real-time data with 211 Orange County and now the new Advanced OC initiative. And it's really great to see all of the many collaborations and other efforts that have come online to further their cause, or like the Family Solutions Collaborative, the OC Hunger Alliance, OC Grant Makers. There's a lot going on. OC Human Relations just started a new initiative called OC Together to address racial inequality. The county has just put out a pilot for COVID-19 equity. So a lot is going on. And I think really this data can help us become an impetus to even further the work to make sure, as we've saw with all of the heat mapping, that we're targeting our investments in the right regions of the county. We're doubling down where we need to. We're serving the right populations. We're addressing those barriers that are so clearly evident around all of the areas that really cripple a lot of families in their progress in the community. So we saw housing burden and childcare and just the cost of food. So things that, again, this is an emphasis on the most basic of needs. So it's an opportunity for us to continue to rise to the occasion. We've done some great work. We have more great work ahead of us to really close these gaps. But I'm excited, again, truly what we've seen with such a challenging year we've all just come out of. But to see the community come together, and we know we can get this done. So I'm hopeful.
Thanks, Brenyal. I think that is the key, right? So we've got some good things happening, and importantly, you just said we're working on the right things, right? We're working on the right things that'll have immediate impact, medium-term impact, and importantly, a sustainable opportunity for us to have that upward mobility and improved economic mobility. We're teeing up some questions, and while we're doing that, I'm going to ask Debra a question. So we'll get some questions from the audience. Debra, how do you envision, like, we're going to use the information that we've been talking about from Henry and from our panelists today? How are we going to use the information from the real cost measure?
What I'd like to see is that the data that was shared today drives action, right? I think there's a lot, Brenyal sort of shared that there's a lot of momentum and a lot of great work that's already happening in the community. And for me, this data, these targeted areas, targeted populations, really require a deeper dive in more of what is everybody doing, where are the gaps, and how do we support each other? Fram sort of shared the resource issues and the funding challenges, but I believe personally that collective collaboration and action, collective action drives change, right? And that if there's an ability to pool our resources, to support each other, to create these initiatives, we can really leverage all the great things that are already happening in our community, and we could take it even further. And I go back to that advocacy component that I shared earlier. It really tells a story of the areas that we need to advocate for. Brenyal shared the challenges with the myths that exist about the safety net programs, about the populations that we're trying to serve. And I think collectively, we have the ability to sort of come together in true collective action. That's what I envision the data being used for.
Thanks, Debra. So I think we have a really good soundbite there, right? Data-driven action.
Right.
I got it, right? That's terrific. Why don't we take a pause here and see if we've got any questions from the audience? I don't know, Amanda or Brenyal, we have a shy audience.
Yes, we do have a question from Steve Churm, our OC United Way board chair. The growing gap between compensation and cost of living in California is accelerating. No real raises for the state's middle class in 4 decades. How does this compare to other states, and what can we do to change this now? Maybe Henry, if you have some insight as well.
Yeah, I think the middle class numbers that you decided there are pretty much comparable nationally in terms of the middle class in general. Just nationally hasn't gotten a sufficient raise in over 40 years. It's particularly accentuated here in California. But that's one of our aspirations over the long term, is to actually produce the real cost measure nationally across all 50 states, so that we can actually go ahead and compare the cost of living between, Alabama, California, New York, Virginia, and other parts of the country. So we're working on that effort now, and hopefully we'll be able to do that over the next few years. But it's a real opportunity for us, not only on a local level, but a national level, to discuss what it really means to live here in the country, and especially in 2022, especially in the aftermath of the pandemic, and what families really need every single day to make ends meet, to make sure that they get the educational opportunities that they deserve, to make sure that they have the food access and that they can afford housing, so that people who are coming out of college now aren't dependent on their parents for housing now or 5-10 years from now as well. So we need to give them the financial tools and resources necessary to help them become self-sufficient themselves.
Thanks, Henry. I got another question here for the panel, but let's start off with Brenyal. What can an individual do to support this issue?
That's a great question. I think I'm always a huge advocate and adopter of becoming more informed, and being okay doing the work to learn what you don't know or aren't sure of. I think I go back again, there's so many misconceptions around this issue and why families are struggling and what can be done about it. And I think in this process, as kind of you're learning and what people can do, it's embracing change, being innovative in our approach. I think one of the things I've heard often in my career is that Orange County is so unique. We're so different from other communities. But I think there's a reality that a good idea is a good idea, and we can learn and lift best practices and that are applicable to our community and helping us to continue to strive and become better. And, you know, I always like to say, don't sacrifice good for great. You have to start somewhere. And we've definitely seen that this past year. We have to be willing to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty. And being okay to be an advocate for others. I think that's what people can really start to think about is how can I be an advocate for others in Orange County? A good way to start is getting it to volunteer. You can donate towards, there's so many causes to donate towards. Obviously, United Way, it's something I would highly promote, but just getting involved and doing your part as an individual or resident of this community to advance the work.
Thanks. Well, why don't I keep the same question, go over to Debra, because Debra, I have a follow-on question for you. Just how would you answer that? What can we do? What can we do as an individual to support the opportunity here?
I think, as an individual, we all play a role in our community and we all know our community. And I think as an individual, I think it's just adding on to what Brenyal is saying is what role can you play? If you are a business owner or a company in Orange County or CEO of a company, where can you provide support to this population? Welfare to Work has paid work experience programs. We have subsidized employment opportunities. But what we lack is an understanding of what the needs of the business community is and what skills, so we can place more of our TANF participants in these sort of paid work opportunities that sort of puts that family in a different pathway. And so it really is, are you an individual? Do you want to volunteer? Becoming informed. How do you help us with the messaging? How do you, in the safety net programs, we have a very low CalFresh penetration rate in Orange County. It's 59%. And the primary reason is lack of information, distrust of government, right? That is where everyone on this call and every individual in the community, that is a simple ask. That is an ask of share the information, help us garner trust, be the bridge, make the connection. I think for me, that is where we as individuals can play a key role in getting the resources to the community where they are and to individualize those resources to the specific need.
Thanks, Debra. And there's a sort of, that's a good bridge to the next question. And I may ask Henry to give some thought to this as we're going on. There was a question that came in about the food pantries and food banks, where it's a great touch point for those who are most in need. And how can we work better together to maybe have that be a conduit to provide food, but also help the dialogue around and kind of get to the access to housing and childcare, education, immigrant advocacy, any kind of those things. And I thought of you, Debra, maybe you could kick us off.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we've seen during the pandemic is just the great strain on food pantries in terms of being able to provide families in need. So there's a couple of challenges there in terms of making sure that they have an adequate food supply for families, but also just secondly is the safety aspect of distributing food in light of the pandemic. And there's a big barriers there in terms of how families are going to be able to access the food pantries with limited transportation. So we can't have families driving 20 or 30 miles, in order to access food. What are some of the things that we can actually do on a local level to actually, see if we can drop off food right on their doorstep, or thinking about initiatives like that on a macro scale to actually help families in need. So obviously that has a big impact. And thinking about the intersections between, food and transportation and how am I going to be able to cover rent, let alone being able to cover food? Even if I do have CalFresh, there's still significant barriers that I'm going to have to face across the board in terms of how do I get from A to B in order to access these resources.
Debra, you have anything to add there?
I think, there's work. I mentioned the CalFresh sort of penetration rate at 59%, but I just want to put these numbers in perspective. So in Orange County, it's estimated that we have 244,000 kids eligible for free and reduced lunch. During the pandemic, the state issued pandemic EBT to 235,000 youth across our school districts. We have 89,000 children enrolled in CalFresh. That is a huge gap. And it's also a huge opportunity where government, community, education can really build the bridge and increase those roles. And yes, CalFresh will not meet the entire need, but it meets some of the need that will hopefully allow the food pantries to be able to have a greater reach in the limited supplies of food and produce that they already have.
Thanks, Debra. I'm going to pivot. Henry, we're going to start with you, and then we're going to go back to Fram about, so you mentioned a little bit in the presentation about COVID and have to adjust all this. What are your sort of initial leans or initial learnings on how COVID has impacted some of the data?
Yeah, one of the things I mentioned at the outset is, the real cost measure study that was released before the pandemic even started. So we know that, at least 37% of families were struggling throughout the state before the pandemic. I would certainly imagine that rate is certainly higher now with the pandemic. And that really looks a lot different from neighborhood to neighborhood, depending on where you live. But the impact for low-income families is real, right? In terms of, especially with the loss of employment or reduced hours, many of those employees are actually working in the service industry. They're largely dependent, maybe many of them are working on restaurants and working at the larger issues in terms of just, restaurant owners and restaurants being open, not only to help them, cover their own business expenses, but also cover the needs for their own employees. So I would imagine that the degree of struggle is certainly higher right now with the pandemic, and we have been able to get some securities, specifically with housing and working with landlords to making sure that families are affordably housed. But we also have a large homelessness challenge throughout Orange County as well, and how do we figure that out in the context of the pandemic in terms of making sure that they're safe and not being able to spread the disease. We're looking, I would say we'll probably start looking at these numbers with the pandemic and the real cost measure in 2022. The 2019 data just came out for last October. So we're starting just to take a look at that now. So we're not going to get the 2020 data until probably the end of 2021. So, but we would pretty much know in terms of what the impact is. It's going to be a lot worse than what it is today. The question for us is, like, what do we do now? What opportunities can we do to actually help reduce the impact of the pandemic on these low-income families?
Thanks, Henry. Fram, we've got a COVID-related question in just a minute, but first let's level set. I think you covered some of this in your earlier comments, but question came in about the Cal State Fullerton sort of graduation rates, and then overall, and then also what's the graduation rates for students of color?
Sure, absolutely. I'm very, very proud with respect to our graduation rates. We are in the midst of a multi-year initiative, which we call GI 2025, Graduation Initiative 2025, to double our graduation rates by 2025. And we are actually above the trajectory to do just that for our both for our community college transfer students and for our first-time freshmen. Our goal is an 80% graduation rate at 4 years for community college transfers, and about a 50% graduation rate at 2 years for community college transfers. And we are just a couple of points below that. And for our 4 and 6 year graduation rates for first-time freshmen, we have similarly, we went from in the teens, now almost a 30% graduation rate at 4 years. And we have about a 60% graduation rate at 6 years. The really good news, though, the really important news is that there was a significant, what we call achievement gap or equity gap between our students from underserved populations and the general population. For community college students, we've closed that gap completely. There is no gap between our underserved students, students from underserved communities, and our mainstream students at the community college level. And for our first-time freshmen, that gap went from about 11.5% to now about 2.5%. So we've been working extremely hard on that. And that is part of this whole process for actually helping with access, persistence, and graduation of students from exactly the communities that we're talking about.
And then thanks, Fram. The following question would be, or is, what's been the college dropout rate because of COVID, or has COVID impacted the dropout rate? And do you see that changing or increasing in the next couple of years?
It's a great question because we expected a lot of students to take a gap year, opt out before they came to college, came to the university, or drop out during the process. And don't get me wrong, we have had students that because of COVID have had to do that. I have a story that breaks my heart that I share all the time. I had a senior in his last semester of school who had been working for 20 hours a week at Ralph's for his whole time going to school. And now he was working about 50 hours a week at Ralph's. And he said, I have to drop out. I said, no, it's your senior year. You're going to graduate. He said, you understand, I am now the primary breadwinner. Mom and dad lost their job. I gotta take care of mom, dad, my sister, my brother. And I said, we'll help you. We'll help you find financial aid. He said, no, this is actually, I have to focus on taking care of my family. And I knew immediately I had to switch to, okay, we'll get you back when you can. So we've had certainly had a reduction there, but our applications to come were actually just as strong this year as they were the last year. There was virtually no difference. Our retention rates have actually been higher than expected because students have been at home working from home. So we're experiencing, unlike some universities, especially on the East Coast and the Midwest, a renaissance in people coming to school because that's what they have the ability to do during this time. But COVID is very, very unpredictable. We don't know how long this is going to last and how long students will. They've made the adjustment to virtual learning. What it's going to be like when they come back. When we come back, there are a lot of faculty, students, and staffs that will still feel unsafe about coming back. So we're looking at that issue.
Okay. Thank you, Fram. Brenyal, question for you on, in what ways can the government and philanthropy and education work together to improve access to resources for those families that are struggling?
Yeah, I think we've been really excited and been in a position to work across sectors in our work at United Way, and that's really been truly powerful and supported the community. I think really the game plan is always not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, and really leveraging strengths and resources to close gaps. I love that with this panel where we have the county, we have the higher education system, all in this discussion. We're all in this together, and so exciting to hear what everyone is doing. I really think an area to focus on and kind of working together is developing braided funded opportunities. Really, truly, I'm looking to you, Debra. I mean, there's just so much I've seen in the power of doing braided funding with public and private resources to really close gaps. Knowing the left hand can only do so much, the right hand can only, but coming together is really exciting. And also working together to design programs. We've worked in partnership with Cal State Fullerton on programs. There's so many opportunities when we can step back and say, you know what, you're really good at this, we're really good at that. Let's come together to get this done. We're serving the same community and we want the community to thrive. And I think really where we have some room to grow and I think could take us next level as a community is advancing data. That's been said many times today about how, even the premise of this conversation is around data, but really kind of going next level, bringing in higher education is so great at this, really having some data that's driving our decisions, but knowing what's happening in response to our actions. So there's an overlay of looking at all of the funding that's going in, for example, to address food insecurity or housing insecurity. How is that playing out in the community? Where is it going? Who is it serving? Is the gap closing? Do we need to pivot? But knowing how to really draw down everything that's touching the issue, that we can map it out and know what's working and what's effective.
Thank you, Brenyal. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And Fram, let's start with you. It's education related. It's probably one step before getting to Cal State Fullerton, but the question is, how can struggling adults be encouraged to utilize education to help get their high school diploma, GED, or improve their language or work skills? And then, so maybe you could start, Fram, and then Henry, you could jump in on that.
You know, what we've talked a lot about, we know the facts now. We know, we've seen from Henry's amazing presentation, it really affirms what we knew. But we don't have in front of us the underlying systemic reason of the why. And I think that takes listening, advocating, and then action. I think your question of how do we get people to take advantage of the resources that Debra has, of education, et cetera, to actually get there. So we have an infrastructure that if we fully avail ourselves of it and get the right people in the right place, it will make a difference. I think that has to do with everybody being an advocate for this. So what's missing in K-12 and in higher education more than anything else is high-touch mentoring by all of us. We can all do this. Every one of us can take on the mantle of mentoring a person who needs our help in understanding and navigating the education system, the social services system, et cetera. You know, we all are here because someone helped us, and we need to reach back. Don't just pay it forward, reach back and pull people along with us. So mentoring is so important. I think for our employers, hire students so they can work while they are going to school. Provide internships. Consider that part of your civic obligation as a good corporate citizen. Employers provide tuition remission. When I grew up in the college system, tuition remission or tuition assistance from employers was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. Now it's much less obvious. I think doing those sorts of things. Partnershiping across communities. So we have something in Fullerton called the Center for Healthy Neighborhoods, where we went in with the city of Fullerton into the Richmond area, and we used our School of Social Services, our psychologists, our early childhood education folks to actually create a vibrant one-stop shopping center for families in need. It has produced amazing results. So finding things like that work and scaling them. And I have to say this it's so important. Leadership in diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice in Orange County is key. We are quiet about this issue. We are too quiet about it. These are the Black and brown students, but also the Black and brown families who are disproportionately affected by COVID, disproportionately affected by socioeconomic challenges. If they are part of the fabric of Orange County, we will make Orange County better together. And so we have to understand that when we rise their boats, as JFK said, we rise all boats, right? That's what we do. So I think that's the action to take after we listen and we advocate and we mentor and move forward.
Thank you, Fran. Henry, do you have anything to add? We got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to completely echo just Fran's suggestions. And we also just need to give students and others just the resources to do that, like internet access for children so that they can succeed in primary schools and not fall behind academically, and making sure that we're able to actually help, college students, those at Cal State Fullerton, with all the resources that they need so that they can actually have mentoring sessions, so that we can actually go ahead and develop strong collaborative partnerships that Debra was addressing earlier. So I think that collaborative aspect is certainly really key, and being identified the resource gaps and filling them could really help low-income families over the long term.
Thank you, Henry. That's terrific. And like Debra said earlier, we need to advocate. Okay, we all have to advocate. And Brenyal said we got to work together, which is awesome. It's right. The public sector, the private sector, the power of this. We've heard a lot today about we've talked a lot in our company about the power of like we can make a profit and do good, and it's not an either or, and that's really part of this imperative, and we can help take action on that. So I know all of you are in, I'm in. We got to work towards that. So I want to thank all the panelists. Amazing job today, and then turn it over to our leader, Sue. Sue, you got the floor.
Thank you. Well, wow, what an amazing panel. So I just extend my thank you. Oh my gosh. Henry, thanks for all of the data, for kicking us off. Alan, superb job for leading the panel, and for Debra and Fram and Brenyal, thank you so much for your words of wisdom, your inspiration, and this can-do attitude. And I love that the and, right? What else can we do? At United Way, we always say doing more. We can do more, and we will. And this is inspiring. I also want to say we are blessed because Alan and Fram are both on United Way's board of directors. And tomorrow we kick off officially United for Financial Security, which Alan, you are our chair of that key initiative, and Debra is part of the Leadership Council. And tomorrow we will have business and government and philanthropy and nonprofits all around the table really working on this issue. So some key takeaways, and I love where you all were going, but Fram, you inspired us to think really seriously about this quiet crisis. We heard from Henry, it was hard for families before, and there were inequities before. COVID, again, amplified what was going on for our families that are most at risk, and there are programs that we can do. So we all need to be aware, we need to learn more, and please come to our site and learn more. I love the idea of collaboration. We're talking about what we're doing tomorrow, how we're all together today, and every way that we can support each other to improve lives. I love this challenge of mentoring, Fram, in terms of doing it bigger, better together. We're going to take that under consideration. And the data-driven drive to action, that was kind of Debra and Brenyal's, that combination, that together we can create action and together we can improve Orange County. It already is a fabulous place. We're here. And we can do so much more together. I am so optimistic, and it's because of all of you. It's for all of you listening. Thank you for being part of it. Please follow us, figure out ways to get involved, but we'll share more as we move forward together to learn more about this important issue of how we help more families go from surviving to thriving. Thank you again. You're all amazing. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we're right on time too.